Hello, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to hear this tale. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. We'd be grateful for your support, and we thank you in advance. Drop the name of the city you're listening from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far our little community stretches. Now, let's dive into the story. Few things burn as sharply as irony. After nearly 2 decades of careful planning, thousands of dollars poured into gear and provisions, and endless nights mapping out every disaster I could imagine, I found myself stuck in the worst possible spot, far from my ironclad retreat. When the world came crashing down, it all kicked off on what should have been a simple errand run to Carterville, Ohio. The town was a decent haul from my homestead, far enough to justify the trip but close enough that I could be back by sundown. Rex, my loyal German shepherd, rode shotgun in my beat-up Tacoma, his eyes sharp and ears twitching as we rolled through the quiet morning streets. The October breeze was cool and crisp, the kind of fall day that lulls you into thinking everything's right with the world. I was wrong. The first hint of trouble hit me outside Jensen's Hardware. At 8 a.m. on a Wednesday, the parking lot was a madhouse, cars jammed in tight, people hustling in and out with armloads of stuff. Canned goods, lanterns, propane tanks. My gut tightened. As a prepper, you learn to spot the signs of trouble brewing, and this wasn't just folks stocking up for a storm. There was a raw panic in the air, a wild edge to their hurried steps. I eased the truck into a spot on the far side of the lot, away from the chaos. Rex's hackles rose slightly, picking up on my unease. "Keep sharp, buddy," I muttered, patting the holster at my hip where my Beretta rested. In the truck bed, locked tight in their cases, were my Mossberg shotgun and a Ruger rifle. Overkill, some might say. I called it insurance. Inside Jensen's, the vibe was like a live wire. The usual small-town calm was gone, replaced by hushed, frantic chatter and the squeal of cart wheels on tile. Snippets of talk floated past me as I moved through the aisles. Whole clinics locked down, troops moving north, cell towers are out in Dayton. I grabbed what I'd come for: duct tape, a coil of rope, some fuses, quick and quiet. 17 years of prepping meant my bunker back home was already loaded with the basics. This was just topping off the tank. At the checkout, an older man and his wife murmured about their daughter, a paramedic at Carterville Medical. Word was the ER had been swamped since midnight with patients raving, feverish, and violent. The cashier, a kid named Tara with shaky hands, rang me up fast. "Boss just called," she whispered, eyes flicking around. "Told me to skip the night shift. Said the hospital's a mess." Back in the Tacoma, I tried my phone. Dead signal. The radio was mostly static, except for one station looping a robotic voice: "Stay indoors. Avoid contact with aggressive individuals. Emergency services are overloaded. Remain calm." Calm? My mind was already spinning through possibilities. The hospital was 6 blocks east. Home was west. I turned the key, the engine growling to life, and started to pull out when a line of military trucks blasted by, 4 Jeeps and a flatbed, tearing toward downtown Carterville. I drilled this into my head over the years. When the brass moves quick, you move quicker. The streets were turning into a circus. People darted from shops to their cars, some tugging masks over their faces. A sheriff's deputy roared past, lights flashing, sirens screaming. Rex let out a low rumble. His training kicking in, he only growled when something was off. I was about to swing onto the highway when I saw him, a guy stumbling out from behind a dumpster, moving like his joints were rusted shut. His shirt was dark with blood, his walk unnatural. He zeroed in on a woman tossing bags into her SUV. She didn't notice him closing in. Rex's growl deepened. I reached for the horn, but before I could hit it, the guy lunged. His jaws clamped onto her arm, ripping through her jacket. Her shriek sliced through the morning like a blade. Everything froze. She hit the pavement, the guy piling on top of her, gnashing and clawing. People started yelling. A bystander ran toward her but skidded to a stop when the attacker whipped around. That face, pale as ash, eyes blank, mouth smeared red, didn't look human anymore. Screams erupted from all directions. I'd prepped for floods, riots, power grids failing, even war. But as I stared at that scene, as more cries rang out, I knew this was something else. Something I'd never taken seriously, something straight out of a late-night movie I'd laughed off. "Rex," I said, voice low, hands locked on the wheel. "We're in deep now. All my years of planning, my fortress waiting back home, and here I was, miles away, watching hell break loose." The bitter twist of it might have been funny if it wasn't so damn horrifying. Getting out of Carterville wasn't going to be easy. The main drags were already choked with traffic, folks fleeing, their cars stuffed with whatever they could grab. Kids stared out windows, wide-eyed and scared. Horns blared in a frantic chorus that seemed to pull more of those blood-soaked freaks out of every shadow. Rex stayed on high alert, his posture shifting with every new threat. I took the back roads, thankful for the hours I'd spent memorizing every twist and turn around this town. A quick glance in the mirror showed downtown crumbling, plumes of smoke curling up, the faint pop of gunfire mixing with sirens. The radio crackled back on, a new message cutting through the noise: confirmed cases of violent behavior linked to infection. Symptoms include fever, hostility, and reports coming in, "Oh no, they're breaking in." It cut to static. Infection. The word stuck in my brain as I pieced it together. The dead eyes, the rabid attacks, the biting. I'd skimmed threads about this on prepper boards, zombie outbreaks, end-of-day stuff. Always thought it was nonsense. Now, watching another one of those things shuffle past a wrecked sedan, I couldn't deny it. This was real, and it was happening fast. I swung onto Pine Avenue, the Carterville Sheriff's Office looming ahead. A dozen patrol cars sat in the lot, but no deputies in sight, just more of those creatures staggering around. A woman in a shredded uniform lurched near the front doors, her badge glinting in the sun, her holster empty. Rex growled again, his head snapping right. A guy in a stained suit charged the truck, mouth gaping. I jerked the wheel, clipping a parked van to shake him off. Then a thud hit my window. A woman, maybe 40, gripping a crowbar. Her two boys crouched behind her against a wall. "Please," she mouthed, pointing down the street. I cracked the glass an inch. "Where to?" "St. Mark's Church," she gasped. "It's 2 blocks. They're taking people in." I dropped them at St. Mark's, where men with rifles stood watch on the roof. Tried to find a clear path out of town after, but every road was a mess, wrecked cars, roaming infected, bursts of gunfire everywhere. I needed a holdout. Then I spotted it, a brick house with a double garage, door up, inside dark and still. It was a block from the sheriff's station, a solid fallback if things got uglier. I eased the Tacoma in, Rex scanning for trouble. The garage was tidy, a handyman setup with tools on the walls and a workbench in the corner. A door led to the house, another to a fenced yard. Defensible, if it came to that. A chopper buzzed overhead, low and loud, shaking the walls as it headed downtown. I didn't bother hoping for a rescue. Government wheels turned too slow in a crisis this fast. Using a shovel from the garage, I tripped the manual release and lowered the door without leaving the truck. The heavy clank made me flinch, but it locked us in. These things could run, not shamble like in the movies. That changed everything I'd planned for. My homestead was built to fend off slow, dumb threats. I'd have to adapt if I made it back. I kept the truck primed for a getaway, backing it up to face the door. Through a narrow window, I watched more infected flood the street, drawn by the chopper's roar. Some sprinted by, others lingered until something sparked their attention. Rex stayed vigilant beside me as I took stock. The garage had potential, tools for weapons, a bench for cover, shelves for a lookout. A half-empty water jug sat in the corner, and a ham radio blinked on the workbench, silent but alive. If it worked, it could tell me what was happening out there. Information was gold now. The morning wasn't even over, and Carterville had turned into a nightmare. I had to play this smart, gather intel, save my strength, and wait for a break to get home. Peering out at the growing swarm, I knew that break might be a long time coming. The garage was our temporary stronghold, a thin shield against the madness swallowing Carterville. I kept the Tacoma's engine off but ready, keys in the ignition, my hands restless on the wheel. Rex sat beside me, his ears swiveling at every sound filtering through the walls, the distant crash of glass, The sporadic crack of gunfire, the guttural snarls of those things outside. The ham radio on the workbench flickered, a lifeline to whatever scraps of order remained. Around noon, it sputtered to life, jolting both of us. Through the static, voices broke through, real, human voices from the Carterville Sheriff's Office, just a block away. East walls holding, a man barked. "We need more hands on the north side. Jennings, you there?" A pause, then, "Front doors are secure. Got maybe 30 folks inside, but ammo's thin. If anyone's out there, this is Carterville Sheriff's. We're still kicking, trying to get people out." I leaned closer, straining to catch every word. The street outside was a shifting mess. About a dozen infected roamed between me and the station, drawn to every loud noise or flicker of motion. It was only a couple 100 yards, but it might as well have been a canyon. The radio crackled again. Highway 12's a no-go, completely jammed. Guards pushing survivors toward Route 7. We're hearing Phillips Elementary's a rally point. Route 7, that was my ticket home. But I needed details on the roadblocks, and those deputies would know more than anyone. Rex's head snapped up, his body tensing. He knew we were about to move. I checked my Beretta full mag and loaded the Mossberg with fresh shells. The Ruger stayed cased. It was too bulky for what was coming, and the shotgun was king up close. "Stay tight," I whispered to Rex. "Quiet signals only." He'd been trained for this. Years of drills, no barking, just subtle cues to flag danger. We'd run scenarios, but never with stakes this high. I eased the garage's side door open, peering out. Clear. The sheriff's station's back entrance was visible if I hugged the buildings. We'd need to move fast and silent. We slipped out, sticking to the shadows. Rex matched my pace, a dark blur at my side, his training shining in every careful step. The air stank of smoke and something fouler, decay, maybe blood. We were halfway there when it went sideways. A storefront door exploded outward, and 3 infected spilled into the alley. Nurses, from the look of their shredded scrubs, stained crimson. Rex stiffened, a split-second warning. The first one locked onto me, its face twisting into a feral grimace. I swung the Mossberg up and fired, the blast shredding its skull. The noise was a thunderclap in the quiet, a beacon for every monster in earshot. The second one came at me as I pumped the shotgun, its arms flailing. I squeezed the trigger just as it lunged, the shot hurling it back. The third was too close, too fast. I swung the Mossberg like a bat, cracking its jaw. It staggered, but didn't drop. Rex broke protocol, launching at its legs with a snarl, dragging it down. I finished it with a point-blank blast to the head. "Over here," a voice shouted. 2 deputies waved from the station's side door, rifles raised. "Run." More infected were piling out of buildings now, the gunfire like a dinner bell. We bolted, my boots pounding pavement, Rex right with me. The deputies laid down cover, dropping the closest threats with tight, disciplined shots. We hit the door as the swarm reached us. The deputies slammed it shut, bolts clanking into place. The infected hammered the steel, a relentless thudding that echoed through the halls. "Close shave," one deputy panted, his tag reading Carter. "That dog's a pro military?" "Canine unit," I said, catching my breath. Rex retired with me. The other deputy, Brooks, gave a quick nod. "Makes sense. Come on, Sheriff Hayes wants to see you. We're pooling every bit of info we can get." They led us through the station, corridors packed with survivors, families clutching each other, a few folks bandaged up in what used to be the coffee room. The place was a makeshift bunker now, but the tension was thick, faces drawn with exhaustion and fear. Sheriff Hayes's office was a war room, maps pinned to the walls, red lines slashing through roads, a radio spitting updates. Hayes stood over it, barking orders into the mic about a supply drop. He glanced up as we walked in. "Carter says you came in hot with a trained dog. What's it like out there?" I ran it down, the infected speed, their reaction to noise, the church shelter, the streets turning into a war zone. "I need intel on Route 7, I finished. Radio said the guards redirecting there." Hayes frowned, rubbing his jaw. "Route 7's open for now. Guards pulling back fast, though. This thing's spreading like wildfire. We've got word of outbreaks in Dayton, Cincinnati, Columbus, all in the last few hours. He tapped a map. You've got a couple hours, tops, before they lock it down. But there's more you need to know. His voice dropped, heavy with something dark. I braced myself. He spread a topo map across his desk, red markers bleeding across the paper, road closures, wrecks, choke points. It's moving faster than we can track, he said. Guards losing ground on every major evac route. They've abandoned 4 posts since dawn. My route home cut through that mess. Columbus is a hot zone, he went on, nodding to a deputy on the radio. Same story everywhere, big cities hit hard. These things run on instinct, noise, motion, anything alive. Only a bullet to the brain drops him for good. A shout from the hall cut him off. Carter burst in, face ashen. Sheriff, south walls buckling, they're smashing through the windows. Hayes snapped to his feet. Get the civilians to the basement. Use the old smuggling tunnels. Brooks, lead him out. Those passages hit the library. It'll buy time. He turned to me. If you're going, move now. My truck's a block west, in a garage, I said, scanning the map one last time. Roof team can cover you, Hayes replied, grabbing his sidearm. But once we're in the tunnels, you're solo. We can't hold this place much longer. A quartermaster tossed me extra shells for the Mossberg and a spare mag for the Beretta. It wasn't a stockpile, but it'd have to do. The infected were clawing at the south wall now, the reinforced glass groaning under their weight. A deafening crash rang out, windows giving way somewhere in the building, followed by panicked shots. Go, Hayes yelled. Rex and I charged out into the afternoon light. Deputies on the roof opened up, their rifles picking off infected with steady precision. The garage was in sight, but the street was a gauntlet, more of those things pouring from alleys and busted shop fronts, drawn by the noise. I raised the Mossberg as 2 rushed me. The first shot blew one's head apart. The second tripped over the corpse, giving me time to rack and fire again. We hit the garage as the station's defenses started to fold. I yanked the door up just enough to slide under, the truck waiting where I'd left it. I jumped in, Rex leaping to his seat. Through the windshield, I saw infected spilling from the station's shattered windows. The roof team was falling back, their shots thinning out. I gunned the engine, tires screeching as I backed out. The street was a flood of infected now, surging toward us. Above, the last deputies vanished from the roof. I caught Hayes in a window, herding people toward the basement, then he was gone. We peeled onto Elm Street when a massive boom shook the ground. Carterville Medical, half a mile off, erupted in flames, orange tongues licking the sky, black smoke choking the horizon. Maybe the oxygen tanks blew, or the generators sparked. Whatever it was, it flipped a switch. The infected pivoted, drawn to the blaze like moths, hundreds streaming from buildings toward the fire. It was a break, but it also boxed us in, cutting off our straight shot to Route 7. I swerved into a gas station lot, killing the engine. We had to wait, let the horde thin out. Rex's ears stayed up, tracking movement. Behind the station, a chain-link fence separated us from the rail yard, rows of freight cars stretching into the dusk. Through the gaps, I saw more infected shambling in, lured by the hospital's glow. We were about to be hemmed in. The truck was tough, but sitting here was a death sentence. They'd swarm us eventually. The rail yard tugged at my mind, a risky detour, but it might skirt the worst of the mess and spit us out near Route 7. Another blast lit up the hospital, smaller but sharp, and the infected went berserk, charging toward it. Their snarls built into a wall of sound. They flowed past us, mindless, chasing the fire. It was chaos, but it was a chance. The streets ahead cleared as the horde shifted, their instincts dragging them to the loudest, brightest thing. My hands tightened on the wheel. 17 years of prepping, and it all boiled down to this. One shot, one gamble, betting on the dumb hunger of these monsters to give us an edge. Timing was everything now, and we had to nail it. The gas station lot was a fragile bubble of quiet, the Tacoma idling low as the world burned around us. Through the windshield, I watched the infected surge toward the blazing skeleton of Carterville Medical, their silhouettes stark against the firelight. Each wave that passed left a fleeting gap in the streets. A razor-thin window we'd have to hit just right. Rex sat rigid beside me, his eyes locked on the chaos, muscles coiled like springs. The truck's engine hummed, ready to roar. The hospital's flames danced in the afternoon sky, a twisted sunset born of disaster, and every explosion pulled more of those things toward it. I counted the beats between the rushes, timing their rhythm. This was it, our shot. A secondary blast ripped through the hospital, a sharp crack that sent debris raining down blocks away. The infected reacted like a flock of birds, wheeling toward the noise, their snarls rising into a fevered howl. The street ahead emptied out, just for a moment. I slammed the truck into gear and floored it. The Tacoma lunged forward, bull bar smashing through a straggler that didn't clear the path fast enough. Its body bounced off the hood, but the reinforced grille held firm, years of mods paying off. We tore through the thinning tide, infected slamming against the fenders, their hands clawing at metal. Rex stayed steady, braced against the seat. I swung onto Maple Street, the hospital's glow casting wild shadows across the asphalt. Wreckage littered the road, an overturned delivery van, a sedan with its doors flung open. I weaved around them, eyes flicking between the path ahead and the mirrors. More infected stumbled out from side streets, drawn by the truck's growl, but the fire was still the bigger lure. We hit Spruce Avenue, 3 blocks from Route 7, when a cluster of them spilled out ahead, chasing a car alarm wailing in the distance. I stomped the brake, the Tacoma skidding to a stop. Rex didn't flinch, his training holding him firm. The horde passed, mindless, chasing the sound. I waited, breath shallow, until the last one staggered out of sight, then punched the gas again. The truck barreled forward, tires chewing through debris, broken glass, a kid's backpack, a shredded tire. We passed the edge of downtown, the buildings thinning out, giving way to strip malls and empty lots. Route 7 was close now, a straight shot to freedom if we could make it. Then it all went to hell. An infected man burst from between 2 parked cars, hurling himself at the driver's side with terrifying speed. His shoulders smashed the window, glass spraying inward like shrapnel. Rex barked, a sharp, rare sound, dodging the jagged edges as the thing's arms flailed through the hole. Its face was a ruin, gray and blood-streaked, teeth snapping inches from me. I couldn't shoot, not without risking Rex or losing control. The truck swerved as I yanked the wheel, trying to shake him loose. His hands clawed at the air, nails raking the dash. In a split-second call, I jerked hard right, then left, aiming for a utility pole. The impact caught his torso, ripping him free with a sickening crunch. He hit the pavement, and I didn't look back. Rex whimpered, another sound I'd never heard from him, and my stomach dropped. I glanced over, heart pounding. His tactical harness was torn where the thing had grabbed, but the thick fabric had held. No blood, no bites. The vest I'd strapped on him that morning, despite the fall heat, had saved his life. "You're okay, boy," I rasped, relief flooding me. "We're okay." A chopper roared overhead, its blades chopping the air as it banked toward the hospital. Its spotlight swept the street, blinding me for a second. I corrected the wheel, but the noise was a magnet. More infected poured out of buildings, sprinting toward us with that unnatural speed. The broken window left us exposed, cold wind whipping through the cab. I pushed the Tacoma harder, the engine screaming as we raced for Route 7. The infected closed in, a wave of gray flesh and snapping jaws, but the road ahead opened up, wider, clearer, the city's grip loosening. I turned north, the hospital's smoke a dark smear in the rear view, and finally let myself breathe. Route 7 stretched out, eerily empty compared to Carterville's madness. Most of the infected had been sucked into the city by the fire and noise. We passed a few abandoned cars, doors hanging open, and the odd infected wandering the shoulder, too far to be trouble. The truck's headlights cut through the gathering dusk, the world sinking into shadow. 20 minutes later, I veered onto the gravel track that wound toward my property, a rutted old logging path I'd scouted years ago. The Tacoma's four-wheel drive ate it up, bouncing over roots and rocks. Each mile peeled away the chaos, bringing us closer to the sanctuary I'd built. Motion lights flared as we neared the perimeter, triggered by sensors I'd buried along the approach. The steel gates loomed ahead, 8 feet of reinforced metal I'd welded myself. I punched the code into the keypad, and they swung open with a low groan. I drove through, waiting until they clanked shut behind us. The cameras showed nothing in the woods, just trees and silence. We rolled up to the house, a low, sturdy bunker of concrete and steel disguised as a cabin. I killed the engine, the quiet rushing in, and sat there for a moment, letting it sink in. We'd made it. Rex stayed alert, even as exhaustion tugged at his frame. I stepped out, Mossberg in hand, and he followed, sticking close. The security system hummed to life as I triggered the lockdown, shutters sliding over windows, bolts slamming into place, every layer a promise of safety. Inside, I ran my checks. Solar arrays were charged, the well pumps were running, the greenhouse was intact. 17 years of work, and it was all here, ready. But before anything else, I knelt by Rex, peeling back his torn harness to check him thoroughly. No cuts, no marks, just a hell of a scare. I scratched his ears, gratitude hitting me hard. "You're tougher than me, boy," I muttered. He leaned into my hand, steady as ever. The world had flipped upside down in half a day. I sank into a chair, Rex settling at my feet, and replayed it all, the infected speed, the sheriff's last stand, the fire that gave us our shot. My plans had always been about riding out the storm solo, a lone wolf in a fortified den. But Carterville had shifted something. I'd seen deputies risking it all for strangers, folks at the church pulling others in. Isolation had been my gospel, but now, maybe it wasn't enough. Rex's head rested on my knee, his breathing slow and even. We'd survived the first day, beaten the odds together. That mattered more than any stockpile. The radio in the corner crackled, a faint signal breaking through. Route 7 still holding, but guards pulling back. Outbreaks confirmed in Dayton, Columbus, reports of infected moving west. It faded to static. I turned it off. Tomorrow would bring new fights, spreading infection, desperate survivors, threats I hadn't planned for. My homestead was a fortress, but it wasn't invincible. I'd need to rethink everything, adapt to this nightmare. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, with Rex beside me and the walls locked tight, I let myself feel it. We were alive. We were home. The real war was just starting, but for now, we'd won the opening round. The hum of the security system was a steady pulse in the silence of my homestead. Each click and were a reminder of the walls standing between us and the insanity we'd left behind in Carterville. I sat in the command room, a reinforced nook off the main hall, watching the camera feeds flicker across the screens. The woods outside were still, bathed in the pale glow of the perimeter lights. No movement, no shadows, just the rustle of leaves in the October wind. Rex lay at my feet, his head resting on my boots, his torn harness discarded on the floor beside him. The day had carved lines into us both, but we were here, breathing, whole. That was more than I could have hoped for 12 hours ago. I leaned back, the chair creaking under me, and let my mind sift through the wreckage of the day. The house was a fortress, concrete walls 3 feet thick, steel shutters over every window, a roof rigged with solar panels that could keep us powered for months. The basement held enough food and water to last a year, maybe 2 if I stretched it. The greenhouse out back would grow fresh greens, and the wells tapped into an aquifer deep enough to outlast a drought. I'd built this place to weather anything: storms, blackouts, even a full-on collapse. 17 years of sweat and paranoia, and now every bolt, every wire, was proving its worth. But as I stared at the screens, the weight of what I'd seen in Carterville pressed against my chest. The infected weren't just a threat, They were a revelation. I'd planned for slow, shambling husks, the kind you could outmaneuver with a good fence and a steady aim. These things ran, fast and feral, driven by a hunger I couldn't fully grasp. The way they'd swarmed the hospital fire, drawn to noise and light like moths to a flame, stuck with me. It was pure instinct, predictable in its chaos, and I'd used it to slip through. But that speed, that aggression, it punched holes in my defenses. The razor wire and tripwires around the property were solid against looters or wildlife, but a horde of those runners? I'd need more than static barriers. I'd need a plan that moved as fast as they did. Rex shifted, his ears twitching at some faint sound I couldn't hear. I reached down, running my fingers through his fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of his ribs. That moment on Route 7, the infected crashing through the window, its claws tearing at his vest, replayed in my head. I'd come within a heartbeat of losing him, my partner through every drill, every lonely night out here. The vest had held, but luck had played too big a role. I couldn't lean on chance again. Tomorrow, I'd reinforce his gear, maybe rig a shield for the truck's windows. Small fixes, but they'd buy us seconds, and seconds were everything now. The radio sat silent on the desk, its last garbled message still echoing in my mind. Outbreak spreading, guard retreating, Route 7 holding for now. I didn't turn it back on. Whatever was coming, I'd hear it soon enough, through the airwaves, or worse, at my gates. For now, I needed to think, to recalibrate. I pulled a notebook from the drawer, one I'd filled with contingency plans over the years, flood routes, fire breaks, sniper nests. Flipping to a blank page, I started sketching. New traps for the perimeter, noise decoys to lure the infected away, a fallback point if the house got breached. My hand moved fast, the pencil scratching out ideas born from the day's lessons. Preparation had gotten us this far, but survival demanded evolution. Carterville lingered in my thoughts, though, not just the infected, but the people. The deputies at the station, holding the line as the windows cracked. The folks at St. Mark's, armed and ready to protect strangers. That woman with her kids, pleading through my window with a crowbar in hand. I'd always figured the end would be every man for himself, that my strength was in cutting ties, digging in alone. But what I'd seen out there was different. People fighting together, clinging to each other in the dark. It gnawed at me. My fortress was a shield, but it was also a cage. If the infected kept spreading, if survivors started showing up, hungry, desperate, maybe armed, what then? Turn them away? Let them in? I didn't have an answer, and that unsettled me more than the monsters. Rex lifted his head, eyes meeting mine. He'd been with me since his K-9 days, through the quiet years when it was just us and the drills. Today, he'd proven why he was more than a dog. He was a soldier, a friend, the one thing I couldn't lose. We're a team, huh? I said, my voice soft in the stillness. He tilted his head, a faint wag of his tail. I smiled, the first real one all day. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. That was my anchor, the one truth I could hold on to when everything else was shifting sand. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Day one of whatever this was had ended, and we'd clawed our way through it. I stood, stretching the stiffness from my legs, and grabbed the Mossberg. One last sweep before sleep. Old habits, but they'd kept me alive this long. Rex followed, his steps quiet on the concrete floor. We moved through the house, checking locks, testing alarms, peering through the reinforced slits in the shutters. The night outside was calm, a stark contrast to the hell we'd escaped. Back in the command room, I sank into the chair again, Rex curling up beside me. Sleep tugged at my edges, but my mind wouldn't quit. I thought about tomorrow. The infected would spill out of Carterville eventually. Hundreds, maybe thousands, fanning across the countryside. Route 7 wouldn't stay clear forever. The guard would fall back or get overrun. Survivors would follow, some good, some dangerous. My homestead was off the grid, hidden by the woods, but nothing stayed secret forever. I need to scout, see how far the infection had spread, figure out if the cities were holding or gone. The radio might give me pieces, but I'd have to see it myself. Quiet runs, just me and Rex, sticking to the shadows. Knowledge was power, and I couldn't afford to be blind. The bigger question loomed, though. How long could this last? A week? A month? Years? I'd built this place to outweigh a collapse, but this wasn't economic ruin or a blackout. This was a plague, a living storm that didn't burn out, it grew. My supplies were finite, even with the greenhouse and wells. If the infected didn't thin out, if they kept coming, I'd have to move someday, find new ground, start over. The idea twisted my gut. This was my sanctuary, my proof against the world's chaos. Leaving it wasn't in the plan, but plans change. Today had taught me that. Rex nudged my hand, pulling me back. I scratched his ears, grounding myself in the moment. We'll figure it out, I told him. Always do. He settled down, eyes half closed, trusting me to keep watch. I envied that trust, that simplicity. For him, it was us against the world, no questions. For me, it was a chess game with pieces I didn't fully understand yet. But he was right to trust. We'd made it this far. That wasn't luck, it was us, together. I dimmed the lights, leaving just a faint glow from the screens. The house was locked tight, the systems green across the board. Outside, the night stretched on, hiding whatever was brewing beyond the trees. I propped the Mossberg against the desk, within reach, and let my eyes drift shut. Sleep came in fits, shallow and restless, but it was enough. Dreams flickered, Carterville streets, the infected's blank stares, Rex's bark cutting through the noise. I woke before dawn, the room still quiet, Rex still at my side. The first light crept through the slits, gray and cold. I stood, stretching, and flipped on the radio. Static, then a voice. Phillips Elementary overrun. Guard units retreating to secondary lines. Stay off the roads, it cut out. I stared at the speaker, the words sinking in. The infection was moving, faster than I'd hoped. Rex watched me, alert again, ready for whatever I decided. I grabbed my gear, Beretta, Mossberg, a pack with water and ammo. Time to move, boy, I said. Let's see what we're up against. We stepped outside, the gates clanking shut behind us. The woods were still, but the air felt different, thicker, charged. 17 years of prepping had brought me here, to this moment, this fight. Carterville had been the first test, and we'd passed. Now the real war was rolling in, and it wouldn't wait. With Rex at my heel, I headed into the trees, eyes sharp, mind racing. The world had changed, and so would we. Day 2 was beginning, and we'd meet it head on, together, always together.